little bye. Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eurydice, and today's episode will be focused on the new masculinity, the emergent masculinity, which also sometimes goes by the title of embodied masculinity. And our guest today is Hans Morgenstern. Hans is a journalist here, a producer with Channel 7 News in Miami. He's also a film critic, has been working as a film critic for 20 years. And last year, or 2019, Hans decided to put his career on hold to explore conscious living with an emphasis on masculine and feminine integration and polarity. So he's been studying under the tutelage of John Wineland, and I am interested in learning more about what men in this moment, in post-Trump, extremely polarized moment in the culture, can do to be more open to their feminine and their masculine, to be kind of conscious and and positive masculine presences and influences in their relationships, intimately at work, and even in their political activism and their philanthropy and their work choices. And I think ultimately in the way that they address the environment, which is one of the most urgent crises right now. We are recording as Texas is on its 5th day of freezing and starving. And that's the most energy-rich state in the most energy-rich country in the world, right? So yeah, the assumption of the masculine that it can go at it alone and it can, tame or control and ignore nature and just, monetize and, transact the shit out of everything else, has proven itself, delusional and false. And I think we kind of all know in our own way, in our own words, that we're living through the last gasp of the patriarchy, but partly because we don't know what the non-patriarchal system would be like, we hold on to all the words and tropes and definitions and mores that we've inherited from our ancestors who were deeply buried and trapped in it. So welcome to the show, Hans. I'm looking forward to learning, as you did, some of these pathways, of the potential, journey that men can go on while they work and while they, live their daily lives otherwise, in order to self-integrate and self-actualize. I know those are kind of new agey ways of speaking, but, basically in order to become more, sensitive and empathetic and fully fledged human beings in this world. Yeah. So how did this start for you? And how did you arrive first to the point of taking time off and giving some months to this course of study and practicing it for 10 hours a day, right? How did that come about?
Yeah, so the 10 hours a day you referenced was just this past weekend. There was a Valentine's Day workshop on Zoom, what they call it an immersion into these practices with John Wineland and his teacher, Deida. And let me just clarify now that I don't represent them in any way. I'm basically a client of them. And I'm going to speak to what their work has allowed for me to grow from. So the beginning of my curiosity of this came just from some little clips that he shares on YouTube while I was feeling the repetition and the loop and the spiritual starvation of being a film critic for 10 years. And it was just the same thing year after year for me. I loved going deep into my film analyses, and I was very respected for that in this world, and really honored by the places that they put me. As I became the chairman of the Florida Film Critics Circle. I won a Knight Foundation grant for my website. I got to the point where it wasn't enough. I felt I was giving a lot of my energy to benefit other people and for very fleeting benefits, be it financial or be it a moment of interest and popularity, and then where was the rest of my life? So I did announce to my organization, the Florida Film Critics Circle, that in 2019, that I would just take a break and do self-healing work. And at that point, I was just curious of John Wineland's embodiment work, yogic embodiment work that he talks about. I didn't know what I was going to do exactly for 2020. However, everything stopped. And it really was a tremendous confrontation of like, wow, you better find some kind of container, find some kind of way of doing this. I'm very open about working with a witch. It's a very esoteric kind of work. She calls herself the Oracle, or Sacred Mirrors. You can find her online. And she really began to really set the container for me with a tarot reading. And from there, I sort of just waited from connecting with nature, being on the beach at sunrise. And I waited for the signs of like, what should I be doing? What should I be called for? John started offering free community calls, an hour and a half sometimes, because of the pandemic. There were a lot of people who were very stressed out and needed guidance. And I asked a question, and he gave me good 15 minutes of his time to explain his answer to my question, my question was, how do I tamp down my yearning heart for a relationship when I'm connecting with women? My sort of hunger for relationship pushed women away. It became repulsive. And so he recommended a feminine energy cleanse. And that was the tighter container within this container that allowed me to focus. And I hesitate to say be where I'm at right now, because I feel like I'm still doing some of the work. But there was a definite transformation.
Where are you now in relation to where you were then when you asked the question? What have you changed?
I've definitely changed my posture. Because one of the things you do learn is how to ground in establishing yourself in front of a feminine being.
And that's the embodiment, right? Part of the embodiment.
And you know, the beautiful thing that's happening right now is the way you're swaying, which is a natural feminine tendency.
I always sway.
Yeah. And for me, that feels good. I mean, I don't have to sway because you're doing it for me. And I just hold the steady breath for you so you can sway as much as you want. And it just creates a beautiful dynamic. So it began with posture.
Okay, so it began with posture. But I'm going back to the original, let's say, problem, right? The original, lack of health that you felt. let's understand this a little better. So you felt that women were not who you were meeting to date were not open to having a relationship with you, or in general to having relationship, because the going wisdom is instead that women always want relationship, right? And that the men want more, whatever, sexual or adventuring or, no strings attached type of exchange.
You see, that's kind of like the old ideas, right? That men are this way and women are that way.
Yeah, the Mars and the women are from, men are from Mars,
Right,
women from Venus,
right.
which was such a, that was such a ridiculous book, and it became a bestseller.
Right. And what we really see in this work, and what I see and what I feel nourished by with this work, is that they both are within each gender. Gender doesn't matter. It's about a sort of energetic flow between. So I find it easier to start by explaining by the yin and the yang energy.
Good, yeah.
The yin being the feminine and the yang being the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically, you always see it as like a two-dimensional object like this, one cupping the other, but it's really 3 dimensions, and it's always flowing, always ever changing. And it's about just finding that comfortable place in that. And it happens within you. So this yearning that I have, my yearning heart, is my feminine energy. And the structure that I create around that, and the sort of safety that I can build around that, so that it's not overly leaky, as they say, is my masculine. Is the structure that I can sit with it and be okay with it. And that's really a lot of the practices that I've been doing is sitting in contemplation of feeling into my heart this sense of yearning and loneliness, and just feeling it and just sitting with it for 30 minutes at a time, whenever I feel like now. But during the cleanse, I probably did it much more than I do now.
So during the cleanse, you spend a lot of time kind of like in meditation and stillness?
There was some of that. I guess I should start with so what did I do with the women in my life, right?
Sure.
So I stopped talking to friends. I let them know ahead of time, especially my close friends, that, I need to take a break for 3 months. And also we're instructed not to engage in flirtatious behavior with anybody who sort of like appears, be it like in a coffee shop or your neighbor. Just keep it transactional, and keep it pure that way. I decided to get off social media, because there would have been too many women to explain myself to in that case. And I didn't want to just suddenly be hit up by somebody during that time. What else? I think that's basically it. I mean, I didn't even talk to like my married friends, and maybe I took it a little extreme in that way. I stopped seeing my female therapist. But then I felt I was also done with therapy too. So this is basically taking my own healing to another level. I think I'm done with therapy. Let's do something more dangerous, more risky than saying stop dating. So you do all this. On top of that, no pornography. I think one of the greatest moments during this cleanse where I felt like there was progress was, and this was on one of his free community calls, when he recommended to me, after a workshop, I had some trepidations of embodying a certain archetype of the dark masculine, the dark lover. And yet I got all this great feedback for it. So I was just, what am I going to do with this? I feel like there's something in me that's just naturally innate in this delicious darkness that women sometimes crave. And yet I have a fear around it. So he suggested I sit down for about 10 to 15 minutes a day and contemplate my own self-loathing and the feeling of that. So it's not about the things that trigger me into self-loathing. It's about being in self-loathing. And whatever comes up, in the body. If it wants to move, if it wants to cry, if it wants to yell, let it out. So I did that for about 10 or 12 days straight. And there were a couple of signs from the universe that said, like, I was done. One of my grounding stones broke. And it also happened to be a new full moon. So just on the cusp of a new moon. And after meditation that night, I was aroused. And one of the most difficult things during these practices is to get aroused during like these meditative places where you can be this like still person. Then I explored self-pleasure with that. So without pornography, without fantasy or anything. And when did you know it? I'd never done that before in my life, but I did climax during that.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just knew I was done with something. And I knew this work was really working toward clearing some stories and traumas that have been just sitting there stewing during this time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we all have like a ton of traumas. And when we interact with another, if we are not like in a conscious place, if we don't have a little extra, space and time to look at ourselves as we interact, then, inevitably we get triggered, we relive, and we're extremely reactive. There is just no other way for any of us. Our first impulse, like the first second response, is the damn reaction that's born from the work that our brains did a long time ago, to protect us from further like pain in response to whatever we perceived as trauma. And the interesting thing here is that, part of like the masculine, the cliche masculine trope has been to judge what is appropriate and what is inappropriate trauma, right? And like according to the old masculine, 90% of psychological or psychic trauma is not manly. So basically the way for the masculine, for the male to deal with his, childhood, babyhood, teenagehood traumas and sources of insecurity and hurt and rejection was to just like repress, deny, right? And then continue to get stimulation from others, which means continue to get triggered in those exact same ways, And that's how we get to a place where, so many men like are serial husbands and serial divorcers, and have like divorce lawyers on payroll, basically, because they find it just more expedient to, marry the girl instead of like try to seduce her, go through whatever, and then file for a divorce and repeat rather than grow. So yeah, like growing, I think a part of the challenge, again, for the old masculine is that change, and processing things and growing the way that you describe it is slow. It's slow in a way that is uncomfortable for us in this extremely like fast-paced, digital life. And it's slow in a way that the old masculine would identify with feminine, like the feminine rests and likes relaxation and lies about and talks about feelings and, introspects too much. And, it's just part of like that life of the woman in the harem, but not of a man of action, of a man in the world, right? So I think these are the cliches that we're all fighting against, but particularly men, they are pulled backward into this like old masculinity from the weight and the mass, of like thousands of years of patriarchal training, that forces them to like take charge no matter what of themselves, at a great cost, as well as like of whoever they're with. So yeah, what you're describing to me is exactly a slowing down. Like slow down, men of the Western world. You slow down yourself in every way.
You and you touched on patterns, habits, this repetition of certain activities from a very base part of the brain, also stuff that you learn as a child. So one of the key aspects of this work is recognizing your patterns and your habits that you keep trying to to get new results by doing the same things and reacting from a place of trauma.
Right.
So what John talks about is that, you know, you change the karma. That's your karma. Your karma is to like keep doing certain things. Your consciousness puts your awareness, which is a very key part of this work as well, which is basically getting in tune with the person or the identity within you before you had a name. It's the one that can be aware of your childhood at 3 years old to your 30th birthday, where your cells have like died and come back and regenerated after 7 years. Everything, your whole body has changed. However, there's a piece of you that remembers it all, and it doesn't judge, it just knows, it observes. So it's about tuning into that channel, and from there saying like, well, normally you'd be doing this, try this for a change and see what happens. It's actually about tuning into my own feminine and not looking for validation from the feminine outside of me. So I have a very natural sort of feminine energy. I've always had that. It's because I've been reading tarot cards since I was 23 years old, and the things I prefer to do aren't always very masculine. I've never cared for sports. I prefer to lie down in a woman's arms. Those sort of things are just more feminine energy. But I neglected it. I neglected that, and it cost me a marriage. I really neglected it in so many levels, and it's time to tune back into that. The only way to do that is not by seeing what I can find out there in the dating world outside of me. It's about really tuning into like what I can find within myself and be okay with like never having a relationship again. So that's why I went an additional 3 months.
Never is extreme. So you went.
I know. It's about feeling good about that.
Yeah. But so how long altogether?
So yeah, it was supposed to be 3 months. It went on to be 6 months. Just because I felt like there was still more work, and there still is some more work to do. I'm still very cautious about stepping up, but I'm not going on 3 dates in one weekend anymore. That's for sure. I knew I spread myself thin in those sort of areas, and this quest for some kind of company, no matter what. It didn't matter if it was just like very diluted sense of energy. At least I got something. Little did I know I had so much within me that feels so good. Now I can bring to them as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's another kind of like interesting moment in our culture, that we tend to, value or accept quantity in place of quality. We've lost a lot of our discriminating edge as people, and I think it's mostly a side effect, again, of like the digital experience. We're all constantly bombarded by so much information, so many humans in the world, all the, whether it's, social media or news sources, everything has been decentralized, and therefore it just like multiplies based on a senseless algorithm, right? And in a way, we tend to expand that, or to expect the same thing to happen in the rest of our lives. So I feel that, dating apps, for example, but also, create this new habit of like, let me just go through people and expect like something magical, to happen. And it doesn't. So it's just getting to know more people and flooding the self with like, superficial information, impressions and smells and, names and jobs and possibilities, and just kind of like, outlines that we never get to fill in. So it's never really possible to have like a fully informed and a real opinion, and that does take time. So yeah, I feel that what you're saying, going on like 4 days states, it's very much like a phenomenon of the moment.
Yeah.
And we all find it difficult to choose someone when we're made so intensely aware of like all the endless possibilities out there. Like 100 years ago that was not possible. There were no endless possibilities. The place, what we call now, like, I'm always like going from a place of scarcity, that was real. If you lived in a little village or in a town and you were not like flying around the world and you didn't have the internet, like there were only so many people who were like age appropriate and available. And they probably all knew each other. So like after you dated one or two, you probably had already dated like all their friends, which got uncomfortable, right? So there were a lot of like limitations already preset in the system, and now they've all vanished. So we're left, to our own resources to try and structure this and frame it. And I think the positive, the evolutionary, outcome of that is this, that we choose to go inwardly and actually find ways to change ourselves, and as more and more of us do it, change the civilization, really, like a mass civilizational shift. And if we are going to move forward out of the patriarchy into a post-patriarchy, that's not so much like a pyramid structure. We need men, right, to lead the way and not feel that defensive and not feel that they have something to lose, or that everybody's ganging against them or blaming them, but instead that they have so much to gain and that they are finding their freedom and their multiplicities and ways to express themselves outside like the work environment as fully fledged humans, not have to depend on like the woman they're with, through whom they could then be, emotional or vulnerable or like, kinship makers or whatever, homemakers. Yeah, do it yourself.
And, you mentioned freedom. And that's one of the big words I heard during this work is, John says that the masculine ultimately only wants freedom.
Oh yeah.
And there's leadership involved. So it's not about robbing and going and doing drugs or like disappearing from everything. You do have responsibilities. One of the aspects of this, he said, start a men's group. So I did contact some friends of mine. I'm like, I'm going to do this thing. I need you guys to support me in this because I'm not going to be going to women to expose my emotions. I need to learn to expose my emotions with you guys. And I'm still meeting with them. I started this back in May of last year. The cleanse ended in December, and here we are in February. And we still meet. It's something that I told them that I'm devoted to. We'll keep meeting. And these are guys that I knew from high school, some who I knew from college, a couple of newer guys who I met in tantric circles, who have also dedicated themselves to this group. And we just meet once a week and we check in with each other in a very structured way. Everybody gets about 5 minutes to share what's alive in them and what they're feeling. And anybody who wants feedback gets it. Anybody who doesn't said, I just want to be witnessed and heard. It's been life-changing for several of those guys. At least they've told me that their relationships with their other friends have changed. So this is the work, right?
Yeah,
And this is the work in action.
That's the best work. Yeah, and then if each one of them starts a group with their other friends, right? That's how it spreads, and you don't have to pay coaches and get into that rabbit hole of spending money on something and then wanting people to pay you to share it, and which I personally get offended by. Personally, I think this type of knowledge should be free. But I do encourage and support everyone to reach out to the people they know and take initiative and not be dependent. I think that again, the patriarchy trained us to to be dependent on receiving right wisdom from outside, and then passing on that same wisdom, right, to others. And that's, proselytizing. And to me, that's not what this should be about. That's how, the church, the organized church of all kinds, of every religion, once they got organized, that's what they did. That's what the nationalist, propaganda or system did. Getting the kids in school, in the classroom, and giving them the framework of
the curriculum,
right? And the thinking framework, right? So I feel that we have become passive in that sense. We think that we are intelligent because we use critical analysis, to read superficial news stories, which actually we should just be glancing over and not, analyzing, because that's what you do with an in-depth study in a book. But we don't use, the same critical analytic tools for this information we get from therapists, let's say, or the experts. So I think that we are in a positive moment, in the sense that the author is dead. The teachers have lost their prestige. Anybody can call themselves a teacher and an expert. That's positive if we don't think of teacher and expert the same way. If we just understand that means that we can all participate, and we can participate from the heart, as you said, because we feel called to, because we feel the need, because it feels good, and then share it with those around us, and do it for the good of all people.
And that's what I do love about working with John, is that I don't feel pressure at all to do to upgrade to another level. Those sort of things that you see a lot marketed in this world. It's you have to get to this level, you pay this extra money. That's not part of his curriculum.
I did see that he offers a 3-year-long teacher training.
Oh yeah, there's always teacher training too. Yeah, that's a whole course in itself. But the thing is that we're not taught this stuff in school, and why people are coming out of school so uneducated as they are is because we're not taught critical thinking. We're not taught decision making. Questions about tuning into your breath and tuning into your heart and making decisions from there is so much deeper than what I heard in school sometimes.
Yeah.
It would have relieved a lot of trauma earlier on had I been in that kind of practice. But my own training in yoga, I've studied Iyengar yoga for 20 years too, and this year I particularly took up pranayama yoga that crosses over into his work in the breath. These men who are in my group decided on who to choose sometimes because they came to me because I was a meditator. I practice transcendental meditation too. So there's all these other fields that I definitely have cultivated to ensure my own sort of autonomous healing. It's really up to you. No one can fix you except yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. We need to change the curriculum in our schools in very fundamental ways, and one such way is, emotional intelligence. Teaching emotional intelligence the same way that we, teach like whatever, cultivate our IQ. And definitely in a world where, coding is emphasized and promoted, right? We need to balance that out by emphasizing even more, emotional and empathetic and caretaking and heart-based, practices and lessons, including sex ed, of course, but not limited to it at all, because that kind of divides, the mind from the body again. So I think the process of what we're talking about, which is an embodiment, is much more, inclusive, and the idea of integrating the masculine and the feminine is, super super valuable. Do you feel that you have reached an integration, or between yin and yang?
It's better than it was last year. That's for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Um, I have to say that something that you mentioned just a little while ago about coding and a lack of empathy. Imagine if Mark Zuckerberg was taught to feel into his heart before he created that Facebook thing.
I know.
Which was all based on duality.
I know.
This is non-dualistic work.
I know.
You think masculine, but it's really sort of an integration in the flow.
If anyone needs to take like a year off,
Silicon Valley, right?
I mean, you feel, again, because we're heart-based, right? I feel a lot of empathy for him. I feel really bad for him every time I see him, because he's so limited. He's so much closer to the machine. And, a lot of these men are this, very successful, like new billionaires, and a couple of one trillionaire or two, however many. Definitely, in need of reuniting with their feminine, and with nature. And I do think, when I call nature, I don't mean like going out in the woods simply. I mean that everything that's included in that, starting with like our body, respecting it, listening to it. Yeah. So, and what about the polarity?
In Tantra, for instance, eye gazing is a big thing, right? Here, eye gazing is a huge thing, and it's about really embodying, if you're a masculine-led person, your masculine energy, and the feminine really embodies her feminine energy. And to maximize it is to sort of exaggerate it, like really like bad acting or something like that. Now, the key is sort of like, and this is something that I even learned from my yoga teacher. When you're doing pranayama and you're breathing, and it's the subtle breath that gets you to transcendence. So it's dialing it back into a subtle, much more subtle place where you can feel relaxed into it, where you can definitely feel like the difference or the magnetism between the two people. And it's a very subtle place that you feel with the heart, with the breath. And it comes and goes. It fluctuates. It's something that David Deida has long taught, John's teacher. And it's just about maximizing the ability to be in the place of harmony. There's a harmony between those two energies that can naturally happen. And sometimes getting to there means increasing your capacity to really push yourself to your edges, to your like, oh, am I going to be too much of this or too much of that? Then you go to relax from there, and that's when you find the nice little harmonious place. And you can't put a name to it. You can't point it out, except maybe, for a moment, you just feel it. And it's a wonderful place to be for me. As someone who got his master's in English and spent so much time analyzing film and art in very intellectual ways. When I was looking for something more, I wanted to feel things. I really wanted to feel like these moments. And I try to explain so much, really just can't explain it. To explain it would be doing it an injustice, you know?
Okay. No, I understand.
Yeah,
I think
to give it a name.
Yeah, I understood when you said harmony. That made a lot of sense for me. So it's basically, the push and pull
Yes.
of back and forth. Yeah, and
Yeah.
finding constantly refinding that balance between the feminine and the masculine, or between yourself and your partner. Yeah.
Yes.
And I understand the importance of not having, not creating or not erecting expectations, like, again, the old masculine wanted to make the rules and set the parameters. This is my home, I'm the head of the household, or I you carry my name. So that gave the masculine the right to kind of expect the feminine to adjust, to compromise, to make peace, to be the one to settle, and in the process the masculine robs himself of that richness of experience, because the fullness, the completion is exactly in our difference, and not in our pretend agreement, But of course, like, pretending agreement is so expedient and easy and faster. So if we value things that are quick and instant gratification, then would rather someone pretend and go along and do what we want. It's not complaining. That's what I'm saying. What you're opening up space. So it's a give and take and a dialogue rather than,
and
chatter.
I just have to say that, a key part is the dialogue from the heart. It's about connecting to your heart and not being from your head. One of the things that I often hear in these discussions in the Q&As is like, as soon as you start strategizing, as soon as you start thinking about like, what should I say to make him do this or whatever, that comes from a place of abuse. And you want to not come from a place of strategizing and thinking. It's poisonous to the whole harmony. It's poisonous to yourself. It's poisonous. It's repulsive. It's painful for the other partner as well. So it's about tuning in to these subtle places, and for the masculine, it's like knowing what the woman needs before she even knows she needs it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come from strategizing.
Yeah, for both, having that intuitive sense. I think that's the meaning of Tantra. The original meaning of Tantra is harmony. And
it's union. Yes.
Yeah, and the way to do that is to find kind of like natural agreement. I remember my teacher in India, was saying, I want you to get to a place of contentment where, you've just left the house to go on a long walk you've been looking forward to, and it starts to rain, and at that very moment, with the first raindrop, you've been wishing for rain. And, so you accept and love and want what is, in a sense. And that's a bit, extreme, but it shows how quickly that changes, and we think of it in a very different way. We have this like sense of a firm identity, and I know what I want, and like the dating coaches are like, write your list and stick to that list, and all of those like masculine based, like what you said, strategies, right? Organically deny the give and take inherent in every relationship. So if you don't stay open in the moment and attuned to each other constantly, and having all the space in the world for each other constantly, then you can't really sustain it. You can just like talk about it, but not practice it. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I broke my heel, and it destroyed my Achilles heel, my tendon, my my ankle is never going to be the same. And you can choose to like complain about it, but I chose to like say, well, look where I'm at not right now. I would never be this rich of a person, never would have decided to like stop writing because I was forced to stop writing in that moment and see what that was like. I was given a gift by the universe by this initiation that I went through.
Yeah. And that's like, it forced you to stop and take a break. It kind of put you in stasis. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's exactly what we were saying. That's the feminine place. Like that's the woman carrying a baby who has to like slow down because and it's just it's not cultivated in our world. It used to be in olden times. Not that I want us to go back to the old times, but they were close to nature, and that's something that we have lost. So
Yes.
in that world, come winter, there was just like a long time of rest. There was no work in the field. There was no you just like lay low, took it easy. So a lot of the vast majority of the people were still going by the rhythms of nature. And unfortunately, our definition of success has been equated with like controlling and fighting nature, overcoming nature. And that's where we are right now in this, environmental crisis, because we haven't accounted, in our system of like defining success, wealth, achievement. We don't account for the natural capital, and we don't, which includes the body, and the feminine, like the birthing feminine, and of course, like nature. How many trees, how much clean air, how much clean water, right? So if we take that off our let's say, account keeping, and we, measure our success, like the GDP, by the opposite, by how much, like, how many trees we cut so we can, agrofarm more, by how much we have further, tamed nature, then it's, it's a self-denying, suicidal way of understanding success, because it's so one-sided, and it tends to be more masculine. So bringing your feminine in, I think, kind of expands in all these ways our understanding.
Yes. And I mean, there's definitely a healthy part of the masculine in that, you bring consciousness to relating. And to bring consciousness means to really breathe. Breath is so important, and to just be aware of the moment, right? That's been we're all taught to like strive for something, accumulate our experiences or wealth. But as you've so astutely pointed out, when there's a wealth within us that can bring us so much more peace. I mean, pay your bills. Don't forget that. You have to pay the bills. But, there's so many better things to entertain yourself with than movies all the time. Sorry. And social media. I mean, you have a pet your cat. It's a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
There's a chance for feedback where we chat back and forth. And he asked us to like basically compliment them on what felt good to you and what maybe you needed more of. But you don't type things like, I need you to smile more. You can say things like, oh, you tease me with the corners of your lips. I would love to see more of that, And then you'll get it, I also learned to lead with my smile, to like evoke smiles from them instead of just following their leads for smiles, which I had an issue with like the previous workshop, but then I learned that quick. But then the third woman they gave me was like this swaying goddess who just like, I'm like, I don't know what she needs. She doesn't need a man. You know, she's got it all down. And she offered, she was in Byron Bay, on the other side of the world, in Australia, in New South Wales. And she offered that she's a free diver. So she can hold her breath deeper than any man in that whole community. 6.5 minutes, she said, was like her limit. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a challenge. Especially since she was wearing a bathing suit. It was just like, she was so feminine, so sexy, so inviting, sticking her tongue out, showing her ass, on all that stuff. And she said that she could express herself in this way because she felt safe. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to cultivate,
because it was like
safe masculine.
Online. That's what you mean?
Yeah. No, it's because my gaze wasn't at her as an object. It's about recognizing the light within these women. And yeah, the thing is, when she appeared, I did lose my breath, and that shows a collapse in the pose, because you are supposed to be deep breathing into the belly and holding them in their breath. That you're supposed to breathe for them so they can express in a way that can sometimes vicious and sometimes very sad. Anything can happen in when you're dealing with the chaotic energy of the feminine, because you're supposed to be like containing them as a masculine, and it's just sort of like sitting there, but also expressing with the eyes and maybe a bit with the mouth. But you have to keep your spine like nice and rigid during these practices. And you know, the thing is that when she like messaged me that she felt safe, because she did expose a lot of her body, and she wouldn't have done that with a man who'd be like, "What's he gonna show me next?" You know, it's so internal. Like that expression is just so like, "Give me more, take. I'm here to hold space for you so you can express," is a very different sort of energy. And so I tuned into that. It was just such a beautiful experience, 3 days of these moments. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with like people with whom you don't, plan to like build on this and, go after them and chase them down.
It's a very tight container.
Yeah.
They say like no hitting on people while you're here. If you think you had a connection, email us. We'll email them. That sort of thing. You know, they really keep a tight container in these practices because it's about getting to an edge that you wouldn't be normally comfortable exploring on a date. So you can bring what you've learned to the date.
Yeah.
In real life.
Yeah. And I do, I think, I wish we had said that, but, I think that feminism, the way it has evolved, feminism, of course, was, an amazing movement of liberation. But
it was important.
The way it has evolved currently does lead many women to function from the masculine, because that's the only thing that our society, our patriarchal society, first of all, models and shows as successful. It's the only way that human beings can get respect, can get rewarded financially, with promotions, can also feel safe. The feminine doesn't feel safe to women either. It feels like, there to be like taken advantage of or exploited for all of us, regardless of like our procreative gender. So it's hard for many women these days to to function from their vulnerable, feminine, authentic space.
There are so many women in this program who just are dying to find a place to do that, because they don't have that otherwise. There's so much fear around being called a slut, for instance.
I understand it. It is hard to be trusting. Trusting feminine, whatever your gender, because the feminine is, the feminine is the one who gets raped, who is conquered, right? So I think that for a lot of women, it's kind of a self-defense, mechanism that
Yes,
that
valid.
yeah, that's valid. Yeah,
Yes, it is. It's very valid.
yeah,
It's about men having to step up to be safe for them, so they
yeah,
can be there.
yeah.
Because I have met women in that group who have also had sexual assault experiences. Because
Oh
it
yeah,
happens more
all
often
the
than,
time.
yeah, so often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So this is when the men have to step up, and other men need to call other men out when they're not doing it right. For
yeah,
instance.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the culture overall, I mean, there are pockets of us here and there, but the culture overall still looks at a woman who presents from a feminine place,
Mm,
from a like open, accepting, sexy place, whether with her
mm.
clothing or her body language or whatever, and
Yeah.
understands that to mean no consent needed, available for all. So, the idea of like the woman being the sole kind of like owner of her body is
Mm.
still very new, and it's not practiced, even though we talk about it. People don't
Yeah,
really
because
practice it.
when you describe a woman like that, who maybe she's wearing clothing, she often is asked to explain herself. She shouldn't have to explain herself of, as to why she's wearing something provocative, or if it feels provocative to someone and someone feels threatened by that. It says more about the person who like brings it up as like, oh, that's provocative. Oh, that's slutty. That's shameful.
Yeah, yeah. Or
But women are asked to explain that.
or it's seen as a invitation, like grab them
Hmm.
by the pussy sort of thing, and
Yeah.
an invitation for assault. And that's the vast majority of the world sees that. So the moment you start to censor yourself as a woman in that sense, then you start self-censoring in every sense. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like
Mm.
it may begin in something as basic as like not wanting the other kids to call you names, or not wanting people to catcall nonstop, in the street, or beep their horns or what. I mean, there is a lot of like nonstop, crazy um, reactivity to just like
Hmm.
being, being a normal to ourselves, so
Hmm.
female. So a lot of women self-censor and
Yeah.
self-cover,
Yeah.
just to like minimize this kind of assault, constant assault. So yeah, until
Hmm.
the masculine comes into its own,
Hmm.
and doesn't get so extremely like you know
Objectifying, or
yeah, and
yeah, and you have
proactive,
to.
extremely proactive,
Yes, yes. I remember going out with one woman to the ween, right? And this guy like decided to grab her boob, and I had to stop him. I had to like yell at him to stop that, because he was drunk and she was dressed sexy. So that felt like it's so obnoxious, because the other issue is that from women saying they have to self-censor, they're holding this natural, right? Natural desire to be and to be seen. That's why when I do these practices with these women, so many times I see them break down crying because they haven't been seen like that. They want to be seen like that. It's like almost traumatic for them to express themselves in these ways, but it feels good. We find that pain and pleasure are also sort of yin and yang kind of energies, in that
no, yeah, for
in the
sure.
fact that someone's expressing, it's like it's a breakthrough, and sometimes it hurts,
Yeah,
but
physical
it's a safe place
physical
to
pain. Yeah,
express. Hmm.
physical pain for
Yeah.
sure is very close to physical pleasure,
It is.
but psychic pain is not at all,
Mm.
and that's a big
Mm.
difference. So, and that's where consent and boundaries come in and make all the difference in the world. But like, for a man, uh, a procreative male, to begin to understand the feminine, it's important to understand that a woman in the world does not feel safe alone, in public, like
Yes,
99.9% of the time. And
I know.
until that changes, which would require like a mass, again, shift in consciousness, until that changes, we can't really be open and equal. We
Yeah,
can't. One of us
it's
is always like, on the defense.
yeah, it's a shame that it seems like there's a minority of men doing this kind of work when we do need a social shift to happen.
I mean,
Mm.
I pretty much have done everything alone often. I
Mm.
go to like events and openings and plays and movies and, whatever alone.
Mm.
Um, but I know that this is me taking risk. And, I have been around the world alone in the dark. And I'm a night owl. So late at
Mm.
night in numerous places, and I always know that I am putting my life on the line at this moment.
Yeah.
But I just interpret the risk as empowering for me. That's just
Mm.
how that's how it works for me. It's just kind of me taking charge of my world, no matter what the the danger or the risk
Ah.
factor. But the risk is huge. I'm walking in the dark at night every night, and there is a single male walking toward me. There is no one else around. I can't make
Mhm.
out his features. I'm scared. That is just so deep, right? And what am I scared of? I'm not scared that he will kill me. I'm scared that he will assault and rape me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you like don't outgrow that. Like I have been
No.
scared like this for my whole life, pretty much since I turned like 12.
Yeah, and especially since you learned that when you're 12, it becomes your go-to feeling when you see a man alone.
Oh
When
yeah,
you're
no,
alone
I
with,
learned it
and he's coming at you.
repeatedly. I learned it
Yeah,
many, many times. Yeah,
yeah.
it gets confirmed. At
But
least
it
like at
sounds like you project
once.
strength in some kind of way. When you're out there by yourself, you find a way to like find your own power within yourself, and you
Oh yeah,
project that
for
sort of
sure.
energy. You create a sort of energetic boundary around yourself, and you do protect yourself. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
an important part for women to learn too, because as soon as they start going like this, the man will go like that. So it's really about projecting that strength, that
Yeah. Yeah.
you can take care of yourself.
Yeah, and you
Mm-hmm.
can only do that like with practice, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, not allowing the repeated, trauma to define you or to change your, you know, your pleasure, um,
Mm.
I is really the way forward. If
Mm.
you hold on to the trauma or to the
Mm.
memory of the attack and the memory of not existing, of not being in charge of your body at all, if
Right.
you are not able to process that and let go, you're not gonna be doing this again. And
Yeah.
that's how we are still women are still taught to like mind their place and stay home.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's to me, that's a big part of the feminine that has defined what we now equate as the feminine, and its ways. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
even imagine what the feminine would be if we had like a century, even forget 5,000 years, even like a century of not having to deal with that. I can't imagine the wealth of self-expression, that would
Yeah.
come out of women if they didn't feel constantly threatened, and
Mm.
judged.
I had a father who punished and wanted to control, and that kind of stilted me back. It held me back a bit. So it's about being able to trust the masculine. Yeah.
That like
Mm.
forced family drama where like the woman and the man are forced to be together for the sake of this child or children, right? In a very, very tight space. And consider, and can take each other like for granted because they procreated. So, they can like throw anything at each other and there is nowhere to go, which is, how our parents or grandparents, one of those generations and all the ones before, experienced intimacy. That created a lot of trauma for the following generation, the daddy trauma, which you carry, like if your dad's a bully or your dad's an absentee, like emotionally absent, how do you not become that? If you haven't had a masculine role model, you gotta make it all up.
Yeah. I'm fortunate to have seen my dad cry a few times, so that was very helpful for me. I'll never forget the first time I saw that when my mom left him. We were at the dinner table. I was 10 years old. That was the first time I saw him cry. And I was just like, who is this man in front of me? I don't recognize him. It was insane. It was mind-blowing. But thankfully, he was able to tune into some of these things sometimes. Even though he hated it, he felt shamed around it. But when he got older, too, he was able to express that more, even though he didn't want to. But he did. He did.
Yeah,
Oh, God, my brother would have such issues talking about this stuff. He would not talk about it. My brother became more like him, very stoic and very like joking about things to push things away.
This is the way for everyone, and it's about, men and women finding it, and finding how that would work in their own daily life and making time for it, which is a big challenge, especially if with full-time work and families and responsibilities and duties. It's a big challenge, but once we become conscious, that's where we also start to make our own choices. Like, do we need to take on as much as we do? Do we need to carry all the responsibilities that we have taken on, have amassed in the process of wanting to please like a social standard of a successful person? How many of all of those really matter to us, and how much it's the outside approval of like the marketplace?
Yeah, because that takes you to the place of you without a name, right?
That's right. Yeah, the truth. Yeah. Well, this was beautiful, Hans. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your time and your honesty. And everybody out there, think about the masculine, the feminine within you and within your loved ones, and how to get to that place of balance and integration simply, easily, quietly. Yeah, and I encourage you all to keep listening. And until next week, also encourage you to keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.